Hello and welcome back to another episode of Word Safari. This is the second in a two-part series that I have called Tantric Entertainment, specifically because we are looking at terms that all come from a specific Indo-European root. That Indo-European root is the root ten, and its fundamental meaning is to stretch. This is a brief review from the last episode if you haven't seen it. Our biggest cognate in English that comes directly through our Germanic inheritance is the word thin. So Grimm's law occurred. It changed the T to a th, and that's why the Indo-European root 10 became thin in our native Germanic vocabulary. However, most of what we've been talking about in this two-part series is not words that come through Germanic, and so, those words would have a th, but words that we have borrowed from Latin, from Greek, from elsewhere, Sanskrit, like the word tantra, for instance, that we talked about in the first episode here. And so those words still have a T at the beginning because they did not undergo Grimm's law in any other subgroups of Indo-European. So we spent the first episode talking about a lot of loanwords, like I said, from Greek, Latin, elsewhere. And in this episode, we're actually going to exclusively focus on some Latin loanwords, and not just any Latin loanwords, but specifically loanwords that are made of compounds. So we've talked about compound verbs in Latin. These are verbs that have a root and then have some kind of preposition at the beginning of the root that modifies the meaning of that term in some way. And so all of our compounds come from two Latin verbs, both of which come from that same ten root. The first one is tendo, and again, this is a bit of review because we already did talk about this in the first episode. This Latin verb tendo, obviously just built off of the ten root with a D extension, means to stretch, and the past participle, which would mean something like stretched or having been stretched, was tensus or tentus, and so that could have an S or a T there at the end instead of a D. So let's dive in and look at some compounds that we get from the Latin verb tendo and various prepositions that were put on the front. So we borrowed a number of different words into English from Latin from different compounds, and you'll see what I mean very quickly. Let's start with extend. Obviously, extend has tend at the end, and that just comes from tendo, which is what we were just talking about. And you can see it's a compound because you put something on the front of the tendo, or just the tend in English, and that thing you put on the front is the Latin word ex, which means out of. It's a preposition and also a preverb because you put it right before the verb. So you can probably figure out what it literally means to extend. You stretch out. Tendo is stretch, ex is out, so you put the two together, and the literal meaning of extend is to stretch out. Extent is based off of the past participle form of tendo, which is why it has a T at the end instead of a D. So it's showing the result of something that has been stretched out, or when you make it a noun like this, the degree to which something has been stretched out or simply stretches out. Extension, which has an S there instead of the T, but is also ultimately based off of the past participle form that we were looking at, of course, is just the act of stretching out. So I started with this one because this one's actually very simple. With some of these, we're going to see that the semantics have evolved and it's not as simple as 1 + 1 = 2. In other words, the two parts of the word don't necessarily add up to exactly what the word means. And some of these we're going to look at. But in this one, it clearly does. Ex means out, tend means stretch, and there you go. Extend means to stretch out. Of course, we can use this metaphorically in some ways, like to extend your time. You're not literally stretching it, but you're metaphorically stretching your time if you get an extension on a deadline or something like that. So you can kind of see how we use this word pretty literally. The semantics haven't changed too much from its Latin root. Let's look at another set of compounds off of tendo. You put a different preverb on the front, and it turns out that this preverb is pre, because pre comes from the Latin pri, which just means before. So tendo means to stretch before. This word can mean before spatially or temporally, but here it's meaning more spatially. You stretch something in front of yourself. That's literally what it means to pretend. Of course, metaphorically, what does it mean to pretend? The way that we usually use this word today is to stretch something out in front of yourself to hide the true nature or motives of something or someone. So if you're pretending to be someone, then it's like you have a mask on. It's like you're wearing something out here that is hiding your true nature. Or We all played pretend when we were kids. That means that you are pretending that something is the case. You're stretching out your imagination is literally what you are doing. You're not lying necessarily. You're just playing pretend. You're pretending something is the case. Pretense is the noun form of that. If you have a pretense to something, it's a device by which something false is claimed. And then if you are pretentious, this is kind of a pretty big word, right? What does it mean to be pretentious? Literally, it means to stretch. It means you're stretching out something in front of yourself. It means you're pretending, maybe not to yourself. You may or may not be lying to yourself in this case, but you're being showy. You're lying to others. You're claiming yourself better than is truly the case. By the way, I do want to say something about an older meaning of the word pretend. It used to not necessarily mean to stretch something out in front of yourself in order to lie or in order to misrepresent yourself in some way. It could mean to stretch something in front of yourself to try to get something. So the old phrase, a pretender to the throne of a kingdom or whatever, didn't necessarily mean that that person was a fake. It didn't necessarily mean that they weren't qualified to be the king or the queen or whatever. It meant that they were stretching out their intention, there's another word we're going to get to very soon, to try to become the monarch of a particular kingdom. So that's an older meaning of pretend that you do encounter every once in a while in English, but certainly in my milieu in English, pretend today really, the way that we usually use this really just means to lie, to use your imagination for something that's not true, to stretch out something in front of reality. That's what it means today to pretend. I told you we were about to get to this word. Let's put a different preverb on the front of Teno. What about in? In is obviously very simple. In just means in or into or onto. So intend means to stretch into. And what does that mean exactly? The meaning of this when you intend something is you're stretching your will out into, that's the in part, into the future. That's what it means to intend something. And so we use this word to mean to plan because, again, metaphorically speaking, you are stretching your will out into the future. Off of the past participle form, you have a T there at the end. Your intent is, as a noun at least, a prior plan because it's something that you have intended, so it's your intent. As an adjective, if you are intent on something, it means that you are in a situation of having stretched your will out into the future. So intent as an adjective means to be stretched toward or at even with the mind. And so that's how intent can be either a noun or an adjective, but it all comes off of this particular root. Of course, if you have an intention to do something, that means it's something that you have planned, it's something that you have stretched out your will for, and based off of intention, we get the adjective intentional, which literally means characteristic of something done by someone whose will was stretched out into the future. That's what it means to be intentional about something. What about if you're intense? This is a slightly different meaning of this same root. Intense still literally means stretched into, but this doesn't necessarily mean stretching your will out into the future like these other cognates on the screen here. This just means that you're stretched into something, which means you're really tense about it, you're really high-strung about it, you really care. That's what it means to be intense. Of course, there could be an overlap here because if you're intense about something, or if you're just an intense person, you might be intentional about the way you try to do things. So there certainly is a semantic overlap here. What about if you put a different preverb on the front of tendo? What if you put odd? Odd is a preverb that we've talked about quite a bit on this channel. It means to or toward, and it also likes to assimilate. That final D likes to assimilate to consonants that follow it. So odd tendo becomes ot tendo, and that's why you get the spelling with two T's there, because those were originally pronounced 2,000 years ago when Latin was a living language in Roman times. So what does it mean to attend? Literally it means to stretch to or toward, and kind of like with what we were just talking about with intend, a lot of times what this means is to stretch your mind or even yourself, it could be your body or your mind, toward something or somebody. So you can attend a sporting event, which means that you're stretching yourself toward it, you're going essentially, or you can attend to a person. If there's somebody who needs help and you're their caretaker, we say that you attend to them, or even if you're just an attendant, you're working in a sporting event, you're the attendant, you might show people to their seats, which means you're stretching out yourself and your mind and your attention, as it were, to a particular person. So we use the word attend in this compound here to basically mean to be present. To be present in body, be present in mind, be present regardless. And of course, again, attention is just the noun form of that, so it just means a stretching toward the application of one's mind to something. If I ask you to pay attention, it means to stretch out your mind or toward me as I'm talking. On the other hand, if you are in attendance at a sporting event, hopefully you're going to be paying attention to it because you paid money to get in there. So it makes sense to stretch your mind out toward it. So you can see that this is a pretty rich set of compounds here because we use it in a number of different ways and a number of different milieus, but they all kind of circulate around this meaning of stretching out your mind, your body, your whole person toward something, someone that needs it or deserves it. Here's a somewhat less set of compounds in English, but you'll probably recognize the word. If you know what a portent is, again, this is something that we use every day, but you know, if you read some books, you know what this word is. Portent. Portent comes from the Latin preverb or preposition pro, which means forward or forth, plus tendo. And so a portent is literally something stretched forth. And the way that we usually use this is an omen. If you say a portent of something, like, you know, bolt of light or whatever, any kind of omen that's out there, you might take it as a portent that some force, whether it's nature or some spiritual being, a god, whatever, is stretching out something to you to try to tell you something. They're trying to send you a message. I put the noun before the verb here because I think we use the noun portent more than the verb to portend, but we do use this as well. And so, of course, this is just the verb form to stretch forth. To, if something is portending ill, it's giving an omen of things to come. It is stretching forth some kind of information about the future. What about ostentatious? What is that os doing at the beginning of the ten root there? That comes from the Latin preverb / preposition ob, which means in the way of, and then sometimes they would change the b to an s there before a t because it's easier to say ost than opt, and that's basically what is going on there, although we're going to see some compounds later where that's not necessarily the case. So what does it mean to be ostentatious? It means that you are stretching something, in this case, yourself, your qualities, in the way of another so they notice it. You're putting it right in their way. You're shaking it in their face. That's essentially what it means to be ostentatious. You're showy, basically. We also have this word ostensible, which we use a lot of times in the adverbial form, like if something is ostensibly the case, it means it could be, it might be, it may or may not be, but it could be shown. It's able to be shown, and so you have that idea once again in the meaning of ob plus tendo that something could be shown, whether you're being showy or the proposition could be shown in some way. One last set of tendo compounds is a very common set, and that comes from Latin con, which means with or together, plus tendo. And so if you contend, then you are literally stretching together. What does it mean to stretch together? It means that you and one or more other people are trying to get something. You're stretching out yourself, your body, your mind, whatever, for something, usually for a prize is the way that we use this word. And so if you're contending, you're competing is essentially what you are doing, or fighting. It can be used in the sense of sports. It can be used in the sense of having an argument of some kind. So it means to compete or to fight. And of course, the noun form of this is contention, which once again, it can also mean to have a competition. Like if you're still in contention for a particular prize or trophy, it means you're still fighting for it. You haven't been eliminated yet. Or if you have a contention with another person, it could just be a fight over something or an argument, right? So sometimes we use this term to mean that as well. Okay, so those are all the compounds that come from the Latin verb tendo. I mentioned there's another Latin verb, and we talked about this last episode if you watched it. Another Latin verb that comes from the ten root in Indo-European, and that is simply teneo. It just doesn't have the d at the end, but it has the same ten root. This means to hold, and the past participle is basically the same, and so it can also have an s or a t in it as well, all right? One interesting thing that's worth noting, because we're going to see this a lot here in these compounds that we're about to talk about, is that when this verb passed into French, as French often did, they changed the pronunciation and then ultimately the spelling of the word somewhat. And so instead of spelling it T-E-N in French, the words that come through French are spelled T-A-I-N, which is, a little bit of a difference, but it's easily recognizable if you are looking out for it. So we're going to see a lot of words that are spelled tain instead of ten in this second half of the episode. Starting, of course, with contain. We just looked at words that have the cone prefix on the start of them with words like contend and contention. So here's another set. I did this on purpose just so we can get all the cones out of the way right at the same time here and compare and contrast them. So cone plus Teno, you get contain, because this word comes through French and the pronunciation and spelling have changed a little bit, but it's still totally the same word. So to contain literally means to hold together. And of course, when we use this word, we say, something contains something. It means that it holds it together within itself. So within is kind of built into the meaning of how we use this, but the original meaning of cone was not within, but rather together. That's basically what it means to contain something. If your food contains ingredients, it means it holds them together within itself. Of course, we also use this if someone says, hey, you need to contain yourself. It means you need to hold yourself together and also hold whatever your feelings or emotions are within yourself, right? So we use that in the same way. Another verb that ultimately comes from this is to continue, which actually literally means to hold an action together. Don't let it go. Don't let it stop. You need to hold it together and keep going. That's the etymological meaning of when you say continue, keep going. Of course, the noun and adjective form of this is content or content. Depending on how you pronounce it, it's going to be a noun or an adjective. As you know, this is based off of the past participle form, which is why it has the T at the end. And notice the spelling is not getting changed in French with the past participle form here. So content is that which is held together, okay? As an adjective, it just means held together. And as a noun, it means that which is held together. So as a noun, you're watching content on YouTube right now. What does it mean that this is content on YouTube that you're watching? It's just everything that's held together within a specific episode. This is the content we're talking about on this particular episode is the word content and related words. But then there's, of course, the whole channel Word Safari, right? That has a lot of content that's all held together by a similar theme. And so you can see why we use the word content to refer to everything on the channel. It's all held together by a similar theme. Of course, as an adjective, it's actually a totally different word, but it comes from the same etymological root. And it makes sense when you see the connection, because if you are content, let's say, and I hope you are, that you are content with the content on this channel. It means that you are emotionally held together. You're not losing it. You're not getting mad. You're not storming off. You're not clicking off of it and going to something else because you hate it. It means you're happy with it, right? If you are content with the content, you are held together emotionally. And then you probably are living on a continent. Most humans live on a continent. Maybe not if you're in Great Britain, but most humans live on a continent and not an island. What does it mean to live on a continent? A continent is a large area of land held together. That's the contain part. Continent, held together without interruption by ocean. And so you can see how that works together with everything we are talking about here as well. What if we put a different prefix on? Retain. Re just comes from the Latin re, which means back. So retain means to hold back. That's literally what it means to retain. And so we use this word to mean to keep. If you retain somebody in a particular position, you're holding them back from leaving, you're keeping them. You're not firing them or whatever. Or if you retain whatever, that's usually what it means. Of course, there are also things called retaining walls, which are built to hold dirt back. And so they're not keeping dirt, they're holding it back. And so they're still doing the literal meaning of that. Retention, of course, is the noun form of retain, because retention is just the act of holding back or an act of keeping. Then we have another word that comes through French ultimately, but it comes from this Latin root and this Latin compound as well. That is retinue. A retinue is a group held back for oneself, at least literally. That is the etymological meaning of that. The original meaning of a retinue hundreds of years ago was it was a group of servants who would follow an important person like a king or a lord or whoever around and accompany them and make them look important. That would be a person's retinue. Now that we're living in an era where there aren't necessarily servants as much anymore, and there aren't necessarily, there's not as much importance attached to status in many cultures, we still use this word to just mean a group of followers. If you have a retinue, they are people who are following you around for some particular reason, which probably still means you're important in some way, and that's what it means to have a retinue. Reign, interestingly, also comes from this, R-E-I-N, not R-A-I-N, but R-E-I-N, which comes through French, and French oftentimes gets rid of consonants that are intervocalic, which means they're stuck between two vowels, and that's what happened to retin in French. Retin became reign, and the T just sort of fell out, which is why it's not there, but it does come from the same root. So the meaning of reins it's a device made for holding something back, and of course you probably know that the most common use of reins is to hold a horse back. That was the original use of reins. However, we use this word a lot in metaphorical terms today that don't necessarily literally apply to riding a horse. Like if you hand over the reins of something to somebody, you're turning over control of it, and now they can do the holding back instead of you. And so we use this word a lot in metaphorical contexts today. Let's put some other preverbs on the front of tain here, and what do we get? What about the Latin preverb ob, which sometimes sprouted an S between the B and the T to make it easier to pronounce? So obs in this case means off or away from. So again, you can kind of just put two and two together here. What does it mean to abstain? It means to hold off from or to keep from doing something. Of course, you probably know that the adjective form of this is abstinent, with what was the present participle ending in Latin on the N, the NT part. The noun form of this is built off of the past participle with the T at the end. Abstention is just the noun form of this, and that's the act of holding off, all right? So you can kind of see how you got the verb, you got the noun, you got the adjective, and they all work together pretty simply. Once you understand what ob means, they all actually make quite a bit of sense. Let's put another preverb on the front, day, which means from or something like that. So to detain is to hold somebody from, and so you're basically holding them from going free. If you're detaining somebody, if you get detained by the police for something, it means that they're keeping you from going free for a specific amount of time. And of course, if you get held by the police and then you get tried and thrown in jail, you will be in a detention facility because detention is just the act of holding someone back from going free. And so again, it kind of makes sense when you see it. Obtain, this is interesting. This is our old friend ob that we just saw a little while ago, plus teneo. So what does it mean to obtain something? Literally to obtain, because ob means in the way of, so obtain means to hold something in one's way, and then that sort of evolved to mean to take into one's possession. You're holding something, you have it right here, you're grasping it, and then you have it, and so that's what it means to obtain something. It means to get it or to take it into your possession. Let's go through several more really quickly here at the end, because there are a few more that are worth looking at that all come from different preverbs in Latin. Pertain just comes from Latin per, which means through fundamentally, plus the tain. So to pertain literally means to hold through, which means like there's some commonality that is holding through different things, which means that they have a connection or they have a belonging or something like that. Of course, the adjective form of this is pertinent with the ent there, that again is the present participle form in Latin. So that's what that means. What about sustain? Sustain comes from Latin sub, under, plus teneo. We've seen this a couple times now where the Romans weren't always thrilled with pronouncing a B and a T together, so there might sprout an S between them, and in this case the B has gone away, but sustain does come from sub plus teneo. So sub means under, as you would probably guess, and so to sustain means to hold under or to like hold up from under. So in the sense of to hold something up from under, you are supporting it. Support actually has the same sub at the beginning, support. That's a different root, but the same preverb. And so to support, to sustain, if the pillars of a bridge are sustaining the weight of the bridge, it means they are holding it up from under. And that's what it means to sustain in that context. Of course, the word sustain also has a different meaning. If you have sustained an injury, let's say, it doesn't mean you're holding something up. It means you are bearing up under the weight of the injury. Hopefully, metaphorically, hopefully there's not a literal weight of something on you that's still injuring you. But the idea is that the injury is like a weight on you that you are suffering through. Actually, there's another one. Suffer has sub at the beginning, sub pharaoh, which we've talked about before. And so to sustain an injury means to bear up, to buckle up under it, and to have to deal with it. Finally, we're going to get to the word entertain, which has been in the title of these 2 episodes. What does it mean to entertain? Entertain, the enter part, comes from the Latin inter, which means among or between, plus the teneo verb. And so the literal meaning of entertain is to hold among, or to hold in the middle of, or to hold between, or something like that. And so just like a lot of these compounds have had an implication that one's mind is involved, or one's intention, so also that's what's going on here with entertain. If you are entertained, then your mind is being held among something that is going on. That's the way that we use the word entertain. It means if you're entertaining someone, you're keeping their attention. If you are looking for entertainment, you're looking for something to hold your mind among whatever is going on and maybe get your mind off of other things. This also explains the way that we use this word sometimes. If you say you're entertaining company, that doesn't necessarily mean you're like putting on a play or something, or, that kind of entertainment. It means that you are just holding their attention in your home or wherever it is that you are entertaining company. So ultimately, that's the meaning of the word entertainment, and it comes from this Latin compound, inter, plus the verb teneo, which of course comes from the ten root. As you can see, we get a lot of things that come from the 10 root. So let me know other 10 compounds that you can think of, because we didn't have time to go through all of them. These guys are hanging out everywhere in the English language, and now that you know to look for them, I think you'll be seeing them a lot. All right, that concludes this 2-part episode. I hope you've had as much fun as I have getting this together. I hope you've been entertained, as it were. I'll see you next time.